Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Sarasatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. It's a very satisfying prayer. We're offering our gratitude to Srila Vyasadeva for giving us the opportunity to connect to Krishna in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's our greatest ally and friend in this world are the scriptures, because at any time we can come in contact with them. We can you bring me the book too, please? Paper's not obsolete yet. Far from it. Experts say that books will remain in print for the foreseeable future. So, and we could take advantage at any time. It's our prerogative to sit down, read the scriptures, and by that be directly connected to Krishna. Anartopasanam sakshat bhakti yoga madhoksaje lokasya ajanato vidvams chakre satvata samhitam. Srimad Bhagavatam says, Shukadeva Goswami says, that the Bhagavatam was compiled by Srila Vyasadeva specifically to awaken the people in Kali Yuga, to give them an opportunity to understand the direct linking process with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There's no other way to be happy. In fact, we noticed in the Srimad Bhagavatam that even though Srila Vyasadeva had compiled all the other Puranas and the Vedic literatures he made available to everyone, still he himself wasn't satisfied. And he wasn't sure exactly why. So he asked his spiritual master Narada, who said that you haven't given the direct process of devotional service, and you haven't fully described the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And without that very direct conception, he said, that one won't be happy. One can't come to the perfection of life. And it's stated over and over again in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And therefore, again, we're fortunate that we have the Srimad Bhagavatam, and we have the authorized commentaries coming down from the great acharyas. And it is a very specific process. And unless one stays regularly in touch with the process, there's a way in which one will be dissuaded by Maya and attracted to other inferior processes. One philosopher once said that it's not obstacles that take us away from the goal, but it's inferior goals that take us away from the ultimate goal. There's so many other processes that are available in this world that will offer themselves. And in a way, this is mercy. Maya also means mercy because she gives us many alternative paths so that we can prove ourselves and so that we can actually focus our mind on a specific goal, which is Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's what this book is about. Ultimately, it's about the ultimate form of God, the original source of all other incarnations, even of all the other forms of the Personality of Godhead. There is the Supreme Personality of Godhead who appears in Vrindavan and who is full of loving relationships, full in his loving relationships with his wonderful devotees. His form is also especially attractive in that he comes as a cowherd boy, and It's also mentioned by Rupa Goswami, specifically that he plays a flute. And the devotees that he's surrounded by are always imbued with very deep, special, loving relationships with Krishna. No other form of God has all the qualities that Krishna has. And the Srimad Bhagavatam directs us in this way to awaken this original relationship we have with Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there are many, many instructions through the various cantos of the Srimad Bhagavatam. I just happen to be reading in the 7th canto right now, and I selected a verse for today that helps us to remember that there is a specific path. Not all paths lead to the same place, and that it is possible to become diverted from the path of devotional service. So one should be vigilant to stay on this path. It's such a short ride, this life. And if one can consolidate one's faith and keep focused on the goal throughout one's life, the results and the rewards are unimaginable. Literally unimaginable for the tiny living entity. But we must hold on somewhere. We must hold on. That's why we have this assembly here in Silicon Valley. And it takes an enormous amount of energy just to keep this facility open and going, because there's a powerful onslaught of material energy that is wont to distract us in many, many different ways. So, congratulations everyone for coming here to focus your attention on Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Let's hear from the scripture. Jalam tad ubhavaishchandam hitvagno jalakamyaya mrigat trishnam upadavet tatanyatrarta drikswataha. For those of you who have joined us via the internet, we welcome you this morning. Hare Krishna. And this is verse number 7:1329, in case you're following along at home in your own book. Here's the purport. Translation. Just as a deer, because of ignorance, cannot see the water within a well covered by grass, but runs after water elsewhere, the living entity covered by the material body does not see the happiness within himself, but runs after happiness in the material world. Purport. This is an accurate example depicting how the living entity, because of lack of knowledge, runs after happiness outside his own self. When one understands his real identity as a spiritual being, he can understand the supreme spiritual being, Krishna, and the real happiness exchanged between Krishna and oneself. It is very interesting to note how this verse points to the body's growth from the spirit soul. The modern materialistic scientist thinks that life grows from matter, but actually the fact is that matter grows from life. Matter grows from life. The life or the spirit soul is compared herein to water. From which clumps of matter grow in the form of grass. One who is ignorant of scientific knowledge of the spirit soul does not look inside the body to find happiness in the soul. Instead, he goes outside to search for happiness, just as a deer without knowledge of the water beneath the grass goes out to the desert to find water. The Krishna consciousness movement is trying to remove the ignorance of misled human beings who are trying to find water outside the jurisdiction of life. Raso Vaisaha, Rasoham Apsukonteya. The taste of water is Krishna. To quench one's thirst, one must taste water by association with Krishna. This is the Vedic injunction. Purport. This is an accurate example depicting how the living entity, because of lack of knowledge, runs after happiness outside his own self. When one understands his real identity as a spiritual being, he can understand the supreme spiritual being, Krishna, and the real happiness exchanged between Krishna and oneself. This is very interesting to note how this verse points to the body's growth from the spirit soul. First of all, this idea of a relationship between Krishna and the living entity is, of course, the essential point of bhakti, because without two entities, there's no question of a relationship. And this also is a fundamental, in this first section of the purport, it's also a fundamental principle for spiritual life, and that is that there's happiness that comes from the Atma. And throughout the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna and various other speakers point to this fact. And the prayers to personified Vedas who offer their prayers give an analogy that a poor man once was alerted to the fact that around his neck was hanging a valuable jewel that he had forgotten. And the entire time this man had been considering his lowly lot in life, LLL, and had simply forgotten the fact that he was imbued with a valuable gem that had been given to him when he was a child. But when someone came along and pointed it out, and he noticed it again, put his attention back there, he realized, actually, I'm not poor, I'm wealthy. The same kind of analogy Lord Chaitanya gave to Sanatana Goswami when he talked about the poor man meeting an astrologer who pointed out a similar thing. It's like, guess what? You're not poor, you're actually rich. You just forgot. You've been diverted, and you've lost your bearings. So the scriptures give us this bearing, give us our bearings to understand where is real value. And in the Gita, we find early on Krishna describing the soul. Of course, anyone who's caught up in the mind, and that's pretty much everybody in the material world, except for one who's practicing the discipline of yoga, there are many ideas related to one's safety in this material world, which never actually give any peace. They're stopgap measures. Along the 101 freeway this morning, as we were driving here, I saw out of the corner of my eye a billboard which recommended some kind of insurance or something. But it showed a man with half a helmet on, and it says, half protected means half not. And I remember once when I first landed in Tokyo and I got off the train and I had my bags and I went straight to the Harinam party, and I had valuables that I didn't want to lose, but I had to put them somewhere, and so I said, devotees, can I put them in the van while we're out on the Harinam party? And I think I said, is it safe? And someone said, it's 98% safe. They were sincere when they said it, but I picked that up because I thought, well, it's that 2% that always nags at one here in this material world. There's an insecurity because we're not our body. The body is actually not a stable unit, although I consider myself to be a certain person in this material world. There's a philosophy that says, you can't step in the same river twice. Because a river, although is named as one entity, and it looks like one entity, you say, there's the Mississippi, there's the Ohio River, there's the Ganga. But the actual river itself is something that's constantly in flux, and so is this body. which is different from the nature of the spirit soul. And as I said, early on in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna assures Arjuna, who's stuck in the mind and in the bodily conception of life, that he's an entity beyond the material body, which can't be cut, burned, dried, can't be killed under any circumstances. I can remember the first time that I read those words, although I had a basic intuition that this was true, to hear it so specifically, so categorically stated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead gives one instant relief to know that actually I'm something different from the body. So what is that soul? The soul is, thank you, something non-material who is part and parcel of Krishna, a spiritual entity. And in the Gita, there are several places that we can look. Let's first look at the Bhagavad Gita, second chapter, and the verses 54 through 58, to get an understanding of how one thinks. What is the psychology of somebody who's looking inwardly and who is identifying with the soul rather than with the body? What are the symptoms of that person? And the reason that we know about it is because Arjuna very appropriately asked Krishna this question that comes up in 254. Krishna has described the soul earlier in the second chapter, correct? And what did he say about him? Say about it. It can't be cut, burned, dried, moistened, never born, never dies. He also says it's amazing. Some see of him as amazing, some hear of him as amazing, some speak of him as amazing, and some, even after hearing about him, can't understand him at all. And that's really true. The soul is an amazing entity in this world. If you look around, you'll see that that's the one thing that is very amazing in this world. And Krishna describes the soul as superior energy, whereas matter is inferior, separated energy. So the soul is the real thing in this world to be interested in, to focus one's attention on. And this is the prerogative of those engaged in spiritual practice. Whatever spiritual practice it is, should be to come to this point of spiritual understanding. So in a general way, Arjuna asks in 254, Arjuna vacha stita pragnasika bhasha samadhi stasikeshava stita di kim prabhasheta kim asita vrajeta kim. Arjuna said, O Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk? And here's Prabhupada's purport. As there are symptoms for each and every man in terms of his particular situation, similarly, one who is Krishna conscious has his particular nature, talking, walking, thinking, feeling, etc. As a rich man has his symptoms by which he is known as a rich man, a diseased man has his symptoms by which he is known as diseased, or as a learned man has his symptoms, so a man in transcendental consciousness of Krishna has specific symptoms in various dealings. One can know his specific symptoms from the Bhagavad Gita. Most important is how the man in Krishna consciousness speaks, for speech is the most important quality of any man. It is said that a fool is undiscovered as long as he does not speak, and certainly a well-dressed fool cannot be identified unless he speaks. But as soon as he speaks, he reveals himself at once. The immediate symptom of a Krishna-conscious man is that he speaks only of Krishna and matters relating to him. Other symptoms then automatically follow as stated. So this is a question, stita pragyasa, one who is fixed in Krishna consciousness, And Krishna wants to know, what is his bhasha? What kind of language? What kinds of things does he describe? Bhasha means, what do you talk about? And he also wants to know, what's his language? How does he sit and how does he walk? And it's kind of interesting, even if one can sit. There's a book I didn't read, but the title was enough for me. It said, don't just do something, sit there. There's something, sometimes mothers say to their kids, don't just sit there, do something. Of course, nowadays, kids are doing something, they're looking at a little screen somewhere. But oftentimes, parents will say, don't just sit there, do something. But then there's a point at which one may ask somebody, don't just do something, sit there. And then ask your mind, don't just do something, sit there and see if you can't look inside. Can you sit for a few minutes even and hear the mantra? Can you hear the Maha Mantra? Instead of wanting to do something. There's an inner life of a spiritual practitioner in which he or she may be able to sit. So it's a good question. How does he sit? And how does he walk? And it's indicative of one's purpose in life, where one walks, because the legs are senses and they're practical. They carry us where we desire to go according to the state of our heart. So where does one end up going? People can walk in all different kinds of directions, and for all kinds of crazy reasons, people can walk around. So one can see how a person is situated in consciousness according to these various symptoms by observing one's life. So let's hear what Krishna says in the next verse 55. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Prajahati yada kaman sarvan parta manogatan atmanyevatmana tushta stita pragnasta dochite. The Supreme Personality of God had said, O Partha, when a man gives up all varieties of desire for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. See, I'm responding to today's verse in which it is said that Atmadriksvata, that a person has to see, or a person who doesn't see the happiness within himself ends up looking somewhere else. And that's a mistake. Because you may have a perfectly good will, and then it's covered over by grass, which grows out of the water, and then walk off into the desert looking for sustenance. And this is a common analogy. It's used also by who else? Who else makes this analogy in his prayers? Who was it who went to pick up Krishna in Vrindavan? Akrura makes this. Also, somebody said, I'm like a person who leaves an oasis to walk off into the desert to look for water. And this idea of a mirage is something that is mentioned frequently in the Vedas. Srila Prabhupada gives the example of talking about the various ways in which one can conduct one's life. One is running after the mirage, which is altogether possible because becoming enamored of the external energy, one may then think that I can really get something out of this, and one may pursue it. And this is compared to animals in the desert. Is everyone okay? Animals in the desert who see a mirage that looks like water and then run after it, and they run until they die. They never actually get there. There's always the promise of water, but actually the taste of water and the quenching property of water is never had by them because it's not really there. The idea is there, but it's not there. So in this material world, the idea of happiness is there, but one never actually tastes it for oneself. And the implication is that one can pursue it throughout this entire lifetime and then die trying. Is that possible? And then one may try the next lifetime, run for it, and die trying. Is that possible? Yes. Is it possible to do it millions of times? Is it possible to do it billions of times? In a Buddhist scripture I saw in Thailand, there was a statement that the living entity has been trying for so long and giving up so many material bodies in the pursuit of this illusory happiness that if you took just the bodies of one living entity and piled them up, the bones, piled them up, they would block out the sun. That's so hard. I'm trying in this material world to find that illusory happiness. Bahunam jamanamante gyanavam mam prapadyate. This after births and births and births, then one becomes a jnani. And then the jnani realizes that, yes, that's a mirage. But because he has incomplete knowledge, he just stops running. He says, I'm not going to be faked out and run for it, so he stops. But unfortunately, that's not enough, because it doesn't mean, just because you're not faked out by it anymore, doesn't mean that you're actually going to drink the water. It just means that you stopped running. It's a temporary situation, just as if you were working for a company and you didn't like the way they were treating you. Anybody like that? In the old days, people used to go on strike. I don't think that's possible anymore in very many places because of the way the world is. But people used to go on strike a lot, and they would get signs and they would walk back and forth in front of the company, and they would say, "We don't like this." And so they were no longer being harassed by the long work hours with not enough pay and so forth when they were on strike, but still they weren't working, and still they weren't getting a salary. It's a temporary situation. So jnanis find only a temporary situation from which they can't stay. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, 10th canto, 2nd chapter, the demigods praying to Lord Krishna in the womb say, Yene ravindaksha vimukta maninas tvayasta bhavad avashuddha buddhaya aruya krishnena parampadam tata patantyato nadrita yushmadangrayaha. That one can't stay in this situation of being on strike from the material world and consider oneself liberated, because unless one has the positive contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the emotional connection to Krishna, then one will fall down from one's situation. And it doesn't matter what that situation is, how exalted it may seem in this world or in the spiritual realm, in the spiritual sense, the only really perfect situation is to reestablish one's relationship with Krishna. So in this next verse, 55, the purport, the Bhagavatam affirms that any person who is fully in Krishna consciousness or devotional service of the Lord has all the good qualities of the great sages, whereas a person who is not so transcendently situated has no good qualifications, because he is sure to be taking refuge of his own mental concoctions. Consequently, it is rightly said herein that one has to give up all kinds of sense desire manufactured by mental concoction. Artificially, such sense desire cannot be stopped. But if one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, then automatically sense desires subside without extraneous efforts. Therefore, one has to engage himself in Krishna consciousness without hesitation, for this devotional service will instantly help one onto the platform of transcendental consciousness. The highly developed soul always remains satisfied in himself by realizing himself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Lord. Is it possible for us to open doors on either side to get cross-ventilation? I have a feeling that we need a little more air. Such a transcendently situated person has no sense desires resulting from petty materialism. Rather, he remains always happy in his natural position of eternally serving the Supreme Lord. Boy, that feels good, doesn't it? We found ourselves a home. So, Krishna is saying here that in the material body and the material bodily situation, one concocts all kinds of ideas. These are like mirages. These ideas that come into the mind that I'll be satisfied by pursuing some sense desire in this material world. They're like chasing after the mirage in the desert. But then one can actually come to this position of being happy within the self. And this is the life of the Muni, as being described in the next verse. But first, in 55, Atmanyevatmana tushta, he's satisfied by the purified mind. Purified mind means that he's able to see the self, the real self. And there's a way in which one can see the self. The self can experience itself, rather than the self observing what is very much like a film going on the screen of the mind, and identifying with the various scenes of sense gratification and illusion that come across the screen of the mind. One can actually experience the happiness of the self. And so this next verse, 56, gives even more definition of what it's like to be situated in that situation. To be situated thus. Dukeshvanu vigna manaha, sukeshu vigata spriha, vita raga bhaya krodha, stita dhir munir uchite. One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind. The word muni means one who can agitate his mind in various ways for mental speculation without coming to a factual conclusion. It is said that every muni has a different angle of vision, and unless a muni differs from other munis, he cannot be called a muni in the strict sense of the term. Nasavrishir yasya matam na bhinnam, Mahabharata. But a stita dhir muni, as mentioned herein by the Lord, is different from an ordinary muni. The stita dhir muni is always in Krishna consciousness, for he has exhausted all his business of creative speculation. It's a business. And he's exhausted. He is called Prashanta Nishesha Mano Ratantara, from the Stotra Ratna, or one who has surpassed the stage of mental speculations and has come to the conclusion that Lord Sri Krishna or Vasudeva is everything. So this is, sometimes we see in spiritual circles that people think Krishna is really great. You meet people, when we do these meetup.coms, where people can come from any realm of life and come practice devotional service for a while. You'll meet a lot of people who are dabbling. Means they'll go to every group and they'll appreciate this one, appreciate that one. They'll come and they'll appreciate Krishna. They'll say, Krishna's really great. I think Bhagavad Gita is great. But there's a difference between that and someone who says, Krishna's everything. That's something that sometimes even in India, when somebody gets involved in the family in Krishna consciousness, they say, Krishna's everything. I'm going to surrender. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. I mean, this religion stuff's great, but, that's a little extreme, don't you think? But actually, that's what Krishna is saying here. When the person becomes exhausted with all these other alternatives and various shades of material desire, and even in the spiritual realm, various alternative ways in which one is practicing one's spiritual life, and comes to this point, Vasudeva Sarvamiti. Everything is Vasudeva, everything is Krishna, and this is what faith means. Faith means Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kahe Suridarnishchoy Krishne Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. That if I just do bhakti, then everything else is okay. I don't need anything else, because Krishna is everything. And this is the Stita Dhir Muni. He'd become convinced of this idea that I'm part and parcel of Krishna. I belong to Krishna. Krishna is the soul of my soul, and Krishna is my protector, he's my maintainer, and simply dedicating my life to Krishna is the smartest thing one can do. This is what a real Muni does. A real Muni says, everything's for Krishna. It's not that just Krishna is nice, or he's great, or he's really good. Krishna is everything. I'm surrendering to him. That's the Stita Dhir Muni. He is called Prashanta Nisheshamano Ratantara, or one who has surpassed the stage of mental speculation and has come to the conclusion that Lord Sri Krishna or Vasudeva is everything. Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabhaha. He is called a Muni fixed in mind. Such a fully Krishna conscious person is not at all disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries, for he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord, thinking himself only worthy of more trouble due to his past misdeeds. And he sees that his miseries, by the grace of the Lord, are minimized to the lowest. Similarly, when he is happy, he gives credit to the Lord, thinking himself unworthy of the happiness. He realizes that it is due only to the Lord's grace that he is in such a comfortable condition and able to render better service to the Lord. And for the service of the Lord, he is always daring and active, and is not influenced by attachment or aversion. Daring and active, did you like that? And not influenced by attachment or aversion. Attachment means accepting things for one's own sense gratification, and detachment is the absence of such sensual attachment. But one fixed in Krishna consciousness has neither attachment nor detachment because his life is dedicated to the service of the Lord. Consequently, he is not at all angry, even when his attempts are unsuccessful. Success or no success, a Krishna conscious person is always steady in his determination. I was just, when I rode out from Mayapur to, where did I go? Calcutta and then Delhi. Yeah, from, I rode with Sri Ram, Sri Krishna Purushottam's brother. And he was telling me something I really appreciated. You know, he came all the way up to Mayapur just to be there for the book launch, and he's heading up a team in India that we've been working on for some time now, called the ISLT, the Indian Sankirtan Leaders Team, in an attempt to increase book distribution in India. And he said something to me very profound on the way to the airport, and that was that only authorized devotional service is satisfying. That is, finding out, working under an authority, finding out somebody who's in line of disciplic succession, who's got some major service, and then saying, tell me what to do. Engage me in the service. And then once one takes up that kind of service, it can expand unlimitedly, and one is very sure that one will be not only engaged, but properly engaged. And in that engagement, one can become daring and active, spiritually daring and active. It's like spiritual entrepreneurialism, and taking many risks for Krishna. And in that state, one becomes a real Stita Dhir Muni. And the idea of renunciation, or the idea of material attachment, no longer applies because one's engaged in the path of dedication. Sometimes when I'm walking around with tilak on, people ask me, I don't know why they ask me about the tilak, and they say, why are you wearing those clothes? But they ask about the tilak often. And they say it's a mark of dedication. And then it gives me a platform to explain that a life of dedication to the Supreme. And I often find that people really appreciate this because people see that it's frustrating working for oneself in this world. And it's, according to Krishna here, and Srila Prabhupada's commentary, it's also equally unsatisfying to renounce everything in the material world because it's not actually ours to renounce. But a life of dedication, that rings true to most people. Of course, they don't necessarily understand who to dedicate to. They think that there are certain causes that are good, and there are many, many good causes in this world, but there's only one great cause. She just made a video like that. So one great cause, and that's fully dedicating oneself to the cause of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then one becomes a Stita Di Muni. And one can then also be fully situated in the Atma, the self, dedicating oneself to this kind of service. Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhavavarjitam nashobate jnanam alam niranjanam. It's mentioned, as I referred to this verse before, but I'm invoking it again, from the 5th chapter of the 1st canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, which Narada Muni says, Naishkarmyam apyachuta bhavavarjitam nashobate jnanam alam niranjanam. That one may even be Naishkarmya, free from all material desires, but unless one's actually dedicated and daring and active in the service of Achyuta, who's a person, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it doesn't look very good. It's not very nice. Nashobate jnanam alam niranjanam. It doesn't look well. And then the verse goes on to say, what to speak of people who are fully engaged in trying to get material happiness? They're just plain stupid. Just plain stupid. But then you go a notch above that and you try to get spiritual happiness by negating the material world through knowledge. And there you won't be satisfied. But if you're fully dedicated to Achyuta, you have a cause, you're dedicated to this cause, and you're daring and active in the cause, then, Krishna is saying here in this verse, that's when you actually become satisfied in the self. And we find this in the 1st canto, right? Where Krishna says, Sutta Goswami is mentioning that all kinds of occupations in the material world have to lead to this kind of dedication to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, he says, Shrama eva hi kevalam. There's simply a useless waste of time. That's good to know in one sense. In another sense, it's a little discouraging because I spent so much time in the material world. In this life and other lifetimes, with wasting my time. Shrama eva hi kevalam. But it's good to know that there is a single cause to which, when one dedicates oneself, then all good things come naturally. One gets knowledge and detachment from the world without even separate endeavor, just by worshiping Krishna, the supreme cause of all causes. And the way to worship him was by dedicating oneself to spreading his glories, Sankirtan, spreading his glories all over the world. So we're looking at specifically in relationship to today's purport. When one understands his real identity as a spiritual being, he can understand the supreme spiritual being, Krishna, and the real happiness exchanged between Krishna and oneself. And I just first looked at the Bhagavad Gita. I'll look at a couple more verses. 3:17. Yastvatma ratireva syad atma triptascha manava atmaniva chasantushtas tasya karyam navidyate. Krishna says, but for one who takes pleasure in the self, whose human life is one of self-realization, and who is satisfied in the self only, fully satiated, for him there is no duty. Purport: a person who is fully Krishna conscious and is fully satisfied by his acts in Krishna consciousness no longer has any duty to perform. Due to his being Krishna conscious, all impiety within is instantly cleansed, an effect of many, many thousands of yajna performances. By such clearing of consciousness, one becomes fully confident of his eternal position in relationship with the Supreme. His duty thus becomes self-illuminated by the grace of the Lord, and therefore he no longer has any obligations to the Vedic injunctions. Such a Krishna-conscious person is no longer interested in material activities and no longer takes pleasure in material arrangements like wine, women, and similar infatuations. And now we'll look at 5:24, and then we're going to have some reflection. Yonta sukontara ramas tatanter jyotirevaya Sayogi Brahma Nirvanam Brahma Bhutto Digachati. One whose happiness is within, who is active and rejoices within, and whose aim is inward, is actually the perfect mystic. He is liberated in the Supreme, and ultimately he attains the Supreme. Purport: unless one is able to relish happiness from within, how can one retire from the external engagements meant for deriving superficial happiness? A liberated person enjoys happiness by factual experience. He can therefore sit silently in any place and enjoy the activities of life from within. Such a liberated person no longer desires external material happiness. This state is called Brahma Bhuta, attaining which one is assured of going home back to Godhead. And finally, Bhagavad Gita 6, chapter, text 5 and 6. You're going to love these. Udaredatmanatmanam natmanam avasarayet atmaiva yatmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. One must deliver himself by the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Purport: the word Atma denotes body, mind, and soul depending upon different circumstances. In the yoga system, the mind and the conditioned soul are especially important. Since the mind is the central point of yoga practice, Atma refers here to the mind. The purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and to draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the mire of nescience. In material existence, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because the mind is involved in the false ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. Therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of material nature, and in this way the conditioned soul may be saved. One should not degrade oneself by attraction to sense objects. The more one is attracted by sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. The best way to disentangle oneself is to always engage the mind in Krishna consciousness. The word he is used for emphasizing this point, that is, that one must do this. It is also said, Mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayoho bandhaya vishaya sango muktyai nirvishayam manaha. For man, mind is the cause of bondage and mind is the cause of liberation. Mind absorbed in sense objects is the cause of bondage, and mind detached from sense objects is the cause of liberation. Therefore, the mind, which is always engaged in Krishna consciousness, is the cause of supreme liberation. Oh, I got to read the next one. We're hearing a lot today, so it's good. Bandharatmatmanas tasya yenaivatmatmana jita anatmanas tu shatrutve vartetatmaiva shatruvat. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends, but for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. Purport: the purpose of practicing the Eightfold Yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. Unless the mind is controlled, the practice of yoga for show is simply a waste of time. One who cannot control his mind lives always with the greatest enemy, and thus his life and mission are spoiled. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. There, feel better? So fundamental and satisfying. I'm going to read this section of today's purport in 7.13.29 that I'm referring to. This is an accurate example depicting how the living entity, because of lack of knowledge, runs after happiness outside his own self. When one understands his real identity as a spiritual being, he can understand the supreme spiritual being, Krishna, and the real happiness exchanged between Krishna and himself. And so far, I've referred to the Bhagavad Gita to give us, and there are plenty more verses in the Bhagavad Gita which give us this idea that happiness is within, and that when one becomes situated in self-knowledge, that one is a part and parcel of Krishna, then one feels actual satisfaction. And when one's externally focused, then bhaya sparshe swasaktatma vindat yatmani yatsukam. That external focus means yehi samsparshajad poga dukha yonaya evate adyantavante konteya nateshu ramate buddha. There's an idea that I have that by contacting this outside world with my senses, which are actually custom made to do that I'll find some satisfaction. But it says, Krishna says, a learned person, an intelligent person, doesn't do that because he or she understands there's a beginning and an end to that. It's illusory. And it won't satisfy me, the soul. It only temporarily titillates the senses. But I don't get anything out of it. And nateshu ramate buddha. Therefore, the person thinks that's not happiness. That's a different category. That's engagement of the senses with their objects. Therefore, he doesn't engage in them. And fortunately, we're being given by the Bhagavatam the actual direction in which to point our mind and senses, and the ways in which to engage them in order to experience real happiness. So these are a few preliminary thoughts. There are two more sections to the purport that I want to talk about in specific terms. But let's take some reflections so far, just to make sure that we can solidify this point as much as possible. Any things that you heard that stuck in your mind so far? Prashant?
Prabhuji, first of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
We missed you a lot.
Missed you too.
So it seems like for me, right, this lecture was really like power-packed in the sense there are like many takeaways. Unfortunately, I don't have my pen and paper, but I remember like two of them. The first thing was in one of the purports we talked about why self-realized soul is satisfied. And the purpose is the reason he's satisfied is because he understands very well that the primary responsibility is to serve the Lord. So I like that point, and thus you find the satisfaction. The second was the example where you gave of the mirage in the desert, right, where a person who is not a jnani runs after the mirage and eventually he dies, right? But a jnani knows that there's nothing in there and he doesn't run after that. That's, I think, very relevant to our day-to-day lives. Also.
Yeah, and I didn't maybe complete the thought because I mentioned that the jnani's in an incomplete situation because he stops running. It's like going on strike, or if you're being chased. For instance, the material world's like being chased all the time because we have debt, and that's what karma means. Karma means debt. We have debts to pay, and therefore we're always being pursued. They're always calling us and saying, "No, you owe more. You know, you owe more." And so this is, sometimes when you're being chased, one might be in a fearful situation, and you run away, and then all of a sudden you find a door, you can run into the door, slam the door, and you can hide. So this impersonal liberation that the jnanis get is something like that. They get in a situation of so-called liberation where now they're not being chased anymore. But how long can you stay in there? After it's just a broom closet or something you ran into. And now you're in there, but you want the whole world. You want to go out and talk to people and dine and converse and have ideas and have a life. There's no life hiding. So bhakti is the way in which, as being indicated in this verse, that one actually drinks the water. And there are several verses at the beginning of the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita describing how the devotees are like swans, ducks, and bees, and how in the material world the tongue becomes desertous because there's no katha about Krishna. It's all about Donald Trump. And and it's really dry because, like, what can you do about it? It's just over and over again the same kind of topics in the material world. But in the spiritual world, the moment you begin speaking Bhagavad Gita or Srimad Bhagavatam with your friends, then you feel some satisfaction because you're actually drinking real water. And when you chant Hare Krishna, the Maha Mantra becomes like an ocean of clear water that just comes into the tongue and quenches one's thirst. So the materialist runs from the mirage and dies of thirst. The Jnani stops running for it because he says it doesn't actually exist. But the Bhakta knows how to get the water. That's the whole point. You know how to actually touch the water. There's an example that I heard from somebody in South India when there's a search for the Supreme. And then the recommendation is that, well, it's just like you're trying to get water when you're thirsty. And you may say that there's water in the clouds, so you help yourself. So in a similar way, someone says, you know, I want to contact God. I need that relationship. You say, well, he's in Vaikuntha. Yeah, but I'm in Silicon Valley. That's a long way away. Just like try to get it from a cloud. And then someone might say that you find God in the avatars, but they appear at various intervals, and how am I going to intersect with one of those avatars who comes to this material world? So this is compared when you're thirsty, dying of thirst, and you need water. You say, you get the water from a flash flood. These flash floods come when there's rain somewhere else, and then all of a sudden this river of water comes down unexpectedly to where you are. Oftentimes washes you away. But that you cannot predict. That you cannot come to very easily. And then someone else might say, I'm thirsty, please give me water. And you say, well, you dig a hole. You can get out of the ground by a well. And so similarly, the yogis, those who practice this very austere Ashtanga process, many different steps to come to mechanically control the mind, and then one can have an inkling of the supersoul within. This is just like digging a well and trying to get the water. You have to also have some apparatus to lower down a bucket and bring it back up again. Even when you have that well dug for you, it's still a pain to pull the water out. I know, because when I was in Hungary at the farm, they didn't have electricity. They're living a natural lifestyle. And we were visiting some of the householders there, and I saw, it's very quaint. They live in this little hut, no lights, except for candlelight at night, and then they have these wells where you lower down the thing. And I saw that, and I said, oh, so how is it getting water out of there? I said, it's really hard. How quaint. But in bhakti, it's like water in the palm of one's hand. If you chant the Mahamantra, you just Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Nam Nam Akari Bahuda Nija Sarvasha. Everything's there. You don't need to go anywhere, you don't need to dig anything, you just need to chant. And if you chant Hare Krishna, then directly you'll get the water. You can drink it just like that. So this system of bhakti means you actually get to drink the water. You'll feel satisfied. And anyone can do it. That's what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu went to teach all over South India. Every house he went to, he said, don't go anywhere. Don't change your style. Just chant Hare Krishna. He said, just get 4 or 7 of you in the house, clap your hands. You don't even need to get it, and sing the Mahamantra. And if you do that, you'll experience directly this spiritual water. You'll be able to drink it yourself. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayat Yashuvairagyam Jnanam Chayara Haitukam. Just by directly contacting Krishna through devotional service, one gets knowledge and detachment from the world. And in that relationship to that, I'll quote another verse in a minute, but we'll take more reflections.
So very nice class, and I feel like you came and giving us a bearing, and instant relief has been already felt. And actually, I've been meditating on this point about that, the relation between the Krishna and ourselves, and it's the exchange give us the happiness. And today, your point about being dedicated and active and daring, if it's not there, then like you said, the inferior goal will take it over. So I was just feeling that, yeah, I've been riding a roller coaster of the false ego, not just this time, but from how long. So thank you for sharing this profound realization and giving us more, faith in looking more within ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. It is really important to have a daring and active life in devotional service, because the forces of the mind and of the modes of material nature are so powerful that if we don't have this forward thrust of, I'm dedicated to the order of my spiritual master, I'm dedicated to this mission, I'm dedicated to this particular sampradaya. In other words, I'm following Rupa Goswami, I'm following the previous acharyas specifically, then one becomes diverted into a nondescript idea of spiritual life. One may continue in one's so-called spiritual life, but then, well, it's not so specific. It's something very generalized. And you will lose your taste. You can't maintain a taste like that because God is something very specific. And this may sound to some, oh, this is very sectarian. But actually, the fact is that there is a personality of Godhead. And oftentimes Prabhupada would challenge people who would give a nondescript idea of God. And you say, okay, then tell us what it means. And they said, well, it's not describable. So no, we'll describe it. The Shastra described. We just read Ishvara Parama Krishna Sakchirananda Vigraha Anadi Radir Govinda Sarva Karana Karma, etc., 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 etc. Throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're being given very specific ideas about the personality of Godhead, the way He looks, the way He acts, what His different energies are, and so forth. And if you don't have that, if you divorce yourself from that idea for the sake of being semi-dedicated instead of daringly and actively dedicated to the cause of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then you won't have the traction that it takes to advance in spiritual life. If your goal is nondescript, your process and your progress will be nondescript also. Harivamsha.
Hare Krishna Maharaj,
Hare
thank
Krishna.
you for a wonderful class and thank you for coming back.
Well, hopefully we're still in the middle of it.
So I also really like the point of mark of dedication. Recently I met many social activists, entrepreneurs, and people who have some cause. By meeting with them, I realized that, well, they have some spark which the normal who are going with the day-to-day lives don't have. As Martin Luther King used to say, that if you have nothing to die for, you have nothing to live for. So that was very attractive. But then over the course of a meeting, and also in our devotional service, we meet many such souls who are daring and active for Srila Prabhupada. I realized that that's where the catch comes. Even those who are socially activists or have a cause in the material world, somewhere or the other there is a melancholy. They are not satisfied. And if you probe a little deeper, you'll come to know, well, that's not exactly the cause. The cause is still bread and butter, and they're still looking for something else. But when you see, like all our acharyas, everybody of them were restless. I mean, they were just not sitting. They were always planning something. And even in our movement, we see so many great souls who are just always active to do for Srila Prabhupada. that's the cause. I mean, that's the real cause. So I really like mark of dedication, the tilaka.
Mark of dedication. I had a small revelation when I was in Mayapur, hopefully more than one, but here's one that came to my mind recently that I expressed a couple times, and now I'll repeat to you. And that was when Srila Prabhupada wrote a poem to his spiritual master, which is recorded in, I think in the songbook, isn't it? Is it not? Adore ye all. Do we have that poem? Adore ye all. Yes, it's a poem that Srila Prabhupada wrote to his spiritual master on his Vyasa Puja day. In all the Vyasa Puja books, it's normally included on Prabhupada's appearance day in those books we come out with. So he wrote a poem in which he glorified his spiritual master. There are various points he made in that poem. Are you all generally aware of this poem? Some of you are? Okay, so can you find the poem, please? Just find it. It's in the Veda base. In any case, he noted in that poem to his spiritual master that he had been saved from the impersonal calamity, and he also said that the spiritual master's teachings were sweeter than May, he wrote. Now, in India, the month of May is not considered to be very sweet. But in America it is. The May Day festival is celebrating spring, actually. And early on, when Srila Prabhupada met his spiritual master, when he was a young man, he accepted him in his heart because he accepted the order that he had given him. 12 years after that, he was officially initiated. But he had already accepted him as spiritual master because he said, here's a qualified person, and he has given me an instruction. And even though unable to carry out that instruction, he accepted it. Adore ye, adore ye, adore ye all the happy day, blessed than heaven, sweeter than May, when he appeared at Puri, the holy place, my Lord and Master, his divine grace. O, my Master, the evangelic angel, give us thy light, light up the candle. Struggle for existence, a human race, the only hope, his divine grace. Misled, we are all going astray. Save us, Lord, our fervent pray. Wander thy ways to turn our face. Adore thy feet, your divine grace. Forgotten Krishna, we fallen souls, paying most heavy, the illusion's toll. Darkness around, all untrace. The only hope, his divine grace. Message of service thou hast brought, a healthful life as Chaitanya wrought. Unknown to all, it's full of grace. That's your gift, your divine grace. Absolute is sentient, thou hast proved. In personal calamity, thou hast moved. This gives us a life anew and fresh. Worship thy feet, your divine grace. Had you not come, who had told the message of Krishna, forceful and bold? That is your right, you have the mace. Save me a fallen, your divine grace. The line of service as drawn by you is pleasing and healthy like morning dew, the oldest of all, but in new dress, miracle done, your divine grace. There it is, blessed than heaven, sweeter than May. So, there's an interesting story behind this poem. Prabhupada wrote it to his spiritual master, and his spiritual master recognized him as a poet. And later on, of course, all his godbrothers did too. After the disappearance of his spiritual master, his godbrothers in an assembly named him Bhaktivedanta, specifically because he was such a great scholar and writer. And his spiritual master had noted from this poem how articulate he was. And the poem was lost. Prabhupada lost that poem, but Gurudas, one of his disciples, found it amidst some other transcripts. Actually, he found it somewhere else, and it wasn't connected with ISKCON. It was somewhere else he was researching, and he found this, and he sent it to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada commented that, oh, I thought it had been lost forever, this poem, and now you found it. Things weren't stored on hard disks and things like that back then. If it was, you lose a piece of paper, it's pretty much gone. So that was one thing, that Srila Prabhupada found it again and had it republished. But then he commented on this part about May. And it was just recently on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's appearance day. I was walking with Radhanath Maharaj, and we were talking about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he brought up this point about May, and he told me that actually May's not sweet in India. And then Prabhupada noted this, that he wrote the poem with America in mind. And see, he wrote this before he'd even come to America. And so this is a remarkable thing. Now, the revelation I had after that, those are just the facts. And here's the revelation I had. In the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu advises that one should live in the holy dham. And if one can't physically live in the holy dham, then one should live there mentally. Should cultivate that. One's always thinking of the holy dham, always living within the holy dham mentally. And similarly, I was thinking how Srila Prabhupada was living in the holy dham, and he wrote this poem. And however, he was living in America in his mind, because that's his Prabhudatta Desh. That's the place his spiritual master asked him to go. And so for a person who is following the authority of the disciplic succession, the spiritual master, the part that's actually absorbing to the fullest extent is following the order. And therefore, although Prabhupada may have been living in the holy dham, he was thinking America, because that's the place I can serve my Guru Maharaj. He was absorbed in that, so much so that when he wrote the poetry, he wasn't saying it's so sweet in the dham at this time. He was saying, in America, in May, it's sweet. Sweeter than May in California, because that's where I'm going to serve my Guru Maharaj. So this is daring and active. There's a way in which one has this internal life of following the order of the spiritual master to daringly and actively carry out the instruction. And one becomes absorbed in that. Whether or not one's there yet, physically, doesn't matter. One puts one's full consciousness and dedicates one's life to that order. And as we know, Srila Prabhupada attributed any success that he had to the fact that he dedicated himself to the order of his spiritual master, even though apparently for so long unable to do it. Apparently unable to do anything significant. And almost looked like it wasn't going to work. But Prabhupada addressed it also in what we just read, in the verse from the 2nd chapter of the Gita, that the Stita Dhir Muni is not so much concerned with that. Whether one's successful or is not successful, the fact that one's dedicated to the order is the important point. Other observations? Yes. We have from the internet.
This is from Vaikunt Nayak Das, Prabhu.
Vaikuntha Nayaka. We got to see him, actually. Now, talking about daring and active.
He is. Dandavats Maharaj, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. A few points. Number one, it's scary to know that it's possible for living entity to be lost for billions of lifetimes. And second, it's not the obstacles that hinder us from achieving our goals, but it's the lower goals.
Yeah. So, nowadays, it used to be time management was the thing that was really important, but that's not possible anymore, according to some modern thinkers. What the terminology now is called attention management. Because there's so little time and so many activities, one shouldn't consider this idea of time management, but you should consider attention management, how you're managing your attention. And if your attention is, if you manage your attention to fix it on Krishna, in whatever situation you're in, then you won't be lost. Otherwise, it's easy to you lose your attention, you lose your connection. It's as simple as that. And whether it's for 1 billion lifetimes or for just a few minutes, the loss is inestimable. Especially now that we've come to contact with Krishna consciousness, to actually lose connection for even what we consider a short amount of time. We may reassess whether that's short or long later on, maybe even when we're leaving this world, that, oh, I could have taken advantage more. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. I always wonder how Srimad Bhagavatam gives wonderful analogy, and this particular was so wonderful, how grass covered and the soul, and it brought so wonderful points. And the second point that you mentioned about how the life is a short journey, it's a short ride, and if you can take advantage, take it like just by doing what is given by Srila Prabhupada in a very compact way. We can take the most advantage of this. And in the third point, I like the Bhagavad Gita, the example in the Sthit Pragya Kabhasa, in which Prabhupada quotes the most important thing is speech, and a fool is undiscovered unless he speak. And that is the best ways to, like, how you glorify Krishna and related to things. And so that is the most important thing to cultivate in our life, the speech. That's what I like very much.
3 points. Very good. Okay. Yeah, don't fail just because you can't do everything, or you can't do something at what you consider to be a highly advanced level. Don't fail to do what you can now with what you have, for the sake of lamenting that you can't do more. Because all progress, including in spiritual life, to the most exalted goal, starts with what you have right now. And doing what you can with what you have right now is altogether possible. Nothing else is possible.
Hare Krishna.
Sukeshwari.
I was just thinking about the point when you mentioned about, the mind can be your best friend and the worst enemy. So how fortunate we are that we have this knowledge, and we're able to understand, we chant, so that, we have the medicine already available. And how unfortunate it is that so many people out there do not have it. So, it makes it more important that we go let everybody know about the medicine.
Yeah, I was coming from Mayapur into Calcutta to catch a flight. I brought books with me, and we stopped a few places because of traffic. Like at one place that particularly stuck in my mind was at a train crossing, and we stopped, and there was a man next to us in a motor rickshaw. So I just rolled down my window and I handed him a book in Bengali, and it just made an impression in my mind, because he was sitting on his rickshaw at a random stop, and all of a sudden a hand came out of a window and handed him a book. And at first he looked a little startled. He looked at me like, what's this American guy with tilak on all of a sudden, right in the middle of my town? And where did this book come from? It's almost like it fell from the sky. And I was experiencing the same things, like, how did this happen? And then he accepted the book, and we still had a minute left, and he opened it, and he started looking at it, and he started reading it. And I was thinking, what's he reading? And I was appreciating the fact that this is authorized knowledge that he's getting and coming from a superior source. And I was vicariously enjoying that first touch with spiritual knowledge. Of course, maybe he's had other touches with spiritual knowledge, but this authorized through the disciplic succession knowledge, I was vicariously enjoying through him, and felt some deep satisfaction to watch somebody else reading it and taking advantage of it. So it's very nice, the distribution. Yes?
My attention was drawn to the point where you said that there are some people who think greatly of Krishna, and there are some who say he's everything. And we met this devotee in Mayapur. She's a Russian girl. And she was talking about her experience of when she was trying to get into Nepal, and she was stopped at the border because she didn't have the right documents. And then she said, I badly wanted to pray to Krishna, but I didn't, there was no deities around. And then on the clerk's desk, she found a pomegranate fruit. And then she said, oh, then I suddenly thought that Krishna is everything, so Krishna must be this pomegranate also. And she said, I just started praying to him in that form. And then she said, in a few minutes, the clerk came back and said he talked to somebody else and you're allowed to get into Nepal. So I was very struck with her, with her faith that Krishna is everywhere and is everything. That's what she used. So.
I'll never look at a pomegranate the same way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I was also waiting for your favorite verse from you quoted 5.24, but before that there's 5.23, which talks about one who has conquered the urges of anger and desires for sense gratification in this life is really, before he dies, is really a happy man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So. And that ties to the verse that you were talking about, like how because of our desires we are running after the water, but if we stop that, then we're really happy.
Yeah, how to develop the potency to actually control the urges of the senses, which are related to the illusory pursuit of happiness in the material world. And if one can develop that, shaknoti haivaya shodhum, praksharira vimokshanat, before one leaves the body, praksharira, before you give vimokshanat, before you have to give up the material body, kama krodot babam begam sayukta sasukinara, then you become a happy human. Another indication of the very basic point of how to switch one's focus from trying to enjoy the illusory world to going for the inner life. Couple more points? Yes. Wow. Okay.
Maya is mercy. The perspective, I like that.
Yes, it gives a backdrop on which we can see how much progress we're actually making. We're given some challenge, and that is that if we take our eye off the goal, then we may be diverted. So we have to be very careful and vigilant. Especially in getting some thrust as we're leaving the atmosphere of the material world, because there's so much sway, the senses have so much power over us in the initial stages of the practice of bhakti yoga, that unless we are diligent in hearing and chanting, and that reminds me, I think this is a good time for me to bring this up. I would like to look at the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 25-278. Buried deep within the Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita is this gem of an instruction by Srila Prabhupada, in which he says, this is the verse, men become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains, but the devotee who simply eats ordinary grains but does not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, that's Madhya 25-278. And the translation is, just focus here, men become strong and stout by eating sufficient grains, but the devotee who simply eats ordinary grains but does not taste the transcendental pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna gradually becomes weak and falls down from the transcendental position. However, if one drinks but a drop of the nectar of Krishna's pastimes, his body and mind begin to bloom, and he begins to laugh, sing, and dance. Okay, don't get distracted if it's the wrong verse. Just pay attention here, okay? Purport. All the devotees connected with the Krishna consciousness movement must read all the books that have been translated, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and others. Otherwise, after some time, they will simply eat, sleep, and fall down from their position. Thus, they will miss the opportunity to attain an eternal blissful life of transcendental pleasure. So the correlation there is of diet and health, diet to health, and reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, Bhagavad Gita, and all the other books published, to one's being able to sustain one's position in spiritual life. It's not a game. It's not, as Prabhupada says in the Light of the Bhagavad, it's not a plaything, going back to Godhead. You actually have to be really serious. Otherwise, you just don't get it. And once you give up the practice, the basic practice, and it's easy for the mind to convince one that, oh, it's just all fanatical. Why should I try so hard? There's so many other good things in this world and so forth. Then one begins to commit an offense that I'll read about now. And this is actually a really surprising purport because it's from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila, 19:156. Does anybody know this verse? It's a nice verse to memorize. I'll say, please repeat. Jadi Vaishnava Paradha Ute Hati Mata Upadeva Chinde Tar Shuki Jaya Pata. If the devotee commits an offense at the feet of a Vaishnava while cultivating the creeper of devotional service in the material world, his offense is compared to a mad elephant that uproots the creeper and breaks it. In this way, the leaves of the creeper are dried up. Purport. One's devotional attitude increases in the association of a Vaishnava. Tannara charana shebi bhaktasani bash jana me hoy e abhilash. By his personal example, Narottam Das Thakur stresses that a devotee must always remember to please his predecessor Acharya. The Goswamis are represented by one's spiritual master. One cannot be an Acharya, spiritual master, without following strictly in the disciplic succession of the Acharyas. One who is actually serious about advancing in devotional service should desire only to satisfy the previous Acharyas. Chai Gosai Jar Mui Tardash. One should always think of oneself as a servant of the Acharyas, and thinking this, one should live in the society of Vaishnavas. However, if one thinks that he has become very mature and can live separate from the association of Vaishnavas, and thus gives up all the regulative principles due to offending a Vaishnava, one's position becomes very dangerous. Offenses against the holy name are explained in the Adi Lila, chapter 8, verse 24. Giving up the regulative principles and living according to one's whims is compared to a mad elephant, which by force uproots the bhakti lata and breaks it to pieces. In this way, the bhakti lata shrivels up. Such an offense is especially created when one disobeys the instructions of the spiritual master. This is called Guru Avagnya. The devotee must therefore be very careful not to commit offenses against the spiritual master by disobeying his instructions. As soon as one has deviated from the instructions of the spiritual master, the uprooting of the bhakti lata begins, and gradually all the leaves dry up. So, the mind, when left to its own devices and not fortified by the good association of Vaishnavas, acts whimsically. And when one acts whimsically, one begins to think that it's not so important to follow the regulative principles. It's not so important to chant one's minimum number of rounds and so forth. And when that happens, what Prabhupada is saying here is that one's not only losing the fortification, but one's also committing an offense, because one's not following the order of the spiritual master. And then the creeper dries up. And then one's position and a prospect of going back to Godhead becomes uncertain or completely lost. And that's a danger that one has to be careful not to become detached from the association of devotees or to act whimsically and concoct some new way of conducting spiritual life outside the orders of the Goswamis and of the previous acharyas and one's present spiritual master. One has to be very careful about that. Other reflections.
So earlier we were talking about the mind as the enemy, and now also you're talking about how we can, how our mind can convince us that it's okay. We can relax a bit. It's not necessary. So I was thinking. I think Rabindra Swarup Prabhu, when he was here, he had mentioned that to be by oneself or be alone is also a very bad association. So I have been noticing, when I'm by myself for a while, mind is more agitated. It will give me lots of ideas. It will have grudges, anger. But when I'm with devotees or when I'm engaged in some service, it tends to calm. And that calmness, it stays for a while. But we need to recharge again and again. Otherwise, again, it's back to the mind again kind of overpowers us.
Yeah, every day. Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya means constantly, always. The acharyas say it means in the beginning stages, at least once a day. We have to renew ourselves every day. That means you have to have good sadhana every day. I made a few notes here about you have to have inner certainty. You have to have your own inner certainty. And how do you get that? You have to do it by intensified sadhana. Your inner certainty about the path of devotional service comes from intensified sadhana. It means your attention really has to be on it. It really has to be the focal point of your day, not as a courtesy. Because that, as the great Mahatma Das says, courtesy japa is dangerous. That you should feel some urgency to it every day and intensify your sadhana. And you have to have grace in your life, which means a life backed by the will of God. And so you have to act in such a way that you're following the will of God. And someone may say, well, how do I know what the will of God is? In fact, I heard a conversation Prabhupada was having with a famous yogi, and he was saying, well, nobody knows. And Prabhupada said, no, it is right there in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says, man mana bhavamat bhakto. It's an open secret. He's saying it to everyone. Think of me. And the next thing is like, well, what do we think of? God, we don't know. This person says, no, Krishna says what he looks like also. It's very clear. So you have to think of God. It's not a nondescript process, or God is not nondescript. There are clear descriptions. One must follow that very carefully. And one must do it every day, because we are swimming against extremely strong forces, the three modes of material nature, and they will grab us and pull us away from the process of devotional service unless we're diligent. Who is next? Yes.
So I want to share one thing, and then I also have a question. So first is, in Veda base there is a book called Sri Prabhupada Uvacha, and in that he talks about perfect speech, how to get perfect speech, and his formula is that one must chant at least 16 rounds every day, follow the 4 regulative principles, get up early in the morning, and then regulate one's eating and sleeping, and if one does that for 12 years, then one gets perfect speech. So I wanted to share this with you, because that is one of the things, an indication of a devotee. And the second is a question that a deer is essentially runs away from water which is hidden under a grass. On the other hand, a devotee will find it, and reference to devotee, there is reference to self-realized person or self-realized soul. So my question to you is, who is the self-realized soul, or how do I identify a self-realized person?
By their perfect speech. Because that's what Arjuna was asking. How do I tell who's actually self-realized? And the first thing he asked was, how do they speak? Because a self-realized person doesn't speak whimsically. A self-realized person speaks according to the scripture and quotes Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. Just like when you said, okay, it came from Srila Prabhupada Uvacha and it's in the Veda base. If you had just said, if you hadn't given a source reference, this is one of the indications of perfect speech, is that a person says, this is where it comes from. This is why it's, what I'm about to say is worth listening to, because it comes from, there's a channel you can see where this comes from that's authorized. So this is one of the signs of a self-realized person. You can see that and how advanced a person is by how much they're able to connect everything to Scripture. That's one of the indications of an advanced devotee. Uttama Adhikari is Shastra Sunipuna, connects everything to Scripture, and it comes out in his or her speech. And there are other indications also about what is self-realized, but that's one of the easier ones to pick out very quickly. Yes?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Usually, as the Hansapriya Mataji was saying, that you just came and you went to the point, and I really felt like this is the exact class that we needed after being away from you for so long. And I was just thinking, like usually when we come from India, it takes at least a week to get to what you're talking about right now, to get to the Shastras and to the point. And usually we talk about like gossip, like what happened there, but rarely about Krishna, like Sita Prajna. So thank you for showing us by your actions, first thing. And my second is about happiness. We read how it's about the connection between the self and Krishna. But there are also other things that determine the happiness, because sometimes we see in the life of the Pandavas that they had perfect relationship with Krishna. But if we ask the other people if they were happy, they may say that they suffered. So how do we define happiness? And yeah, so that's my question.
Actually, what appears to be suffering in the life of a devotee, we can judge by the things they're asking for. Even the Pandavas were feeling more and more dependent on Krishna and realizing their dependence on Krishna because of the so-called external situations that they were in. And this constitutes real happiness. That the idea that I'm independent or that I can find happiness by fortifying myself through material means is completely discounted early on in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Deha patra kalatradesu asainesu satsapi tesham pramato nidhanam paschanapina pashati. One's actually considered to be mad, says Shukadeva Goswami, if he or she thinks that I can find some protection in the material world that he calls the fallible soldiers of the body, the mind, the family members, the insurance policy, the money in the bank, and all that kind of thing, gives me some sense of happiness. It's very tenuous. And there's a deep-seated anxiety in the heart of every person in the material world, even those who are completely materially taken care of, or especially perhaps, there's this deep-seated fear that I'll lose it all, because there's a bodily conception of life. It's almost worse. The more you get protected in the material sense, the more you have this deep-seated anxiety. But for the devotee who depends on Krishna in all circumstances, whether he's rich or poor, in a good circumstance or a bad so-called externally considered bad circumstance, this is mentioned in the fourth what verse am I thinking of? It just went out of my head. Narakeshu apitulya dharta darshana. Huh? That's the second line, first line. Narayana paraksarvena kutashana bipyati swarga pavarga narakeshu apitulyarta darshinaha. For a devotee, whether the situation appears heavenly or hellish, it's all the same. I had an experience when I was, the first time I went to Japan, I think it was 1979, and I was flying on a jet, and I fell asleep, and I was waking up as they were landing, and I was thinking, oh, here's a magical new land, Japan. I mean, especially back then, it was such an enchanted place. completely different from the culture I was used to. And I thought, somehow in my waking up state, I was thinking, this is probably a different planet altogether. And maybe all of the anomalies that I'm used to in the material world don't exist here. One always holds out hope for that. And as I was landing, I could look down and I saw an ambulance with its... Everything looks so ordered. In Japan, there's a false sense. Because if you leave your wallet in a cab, it's probably still like this even now. But back then, 1979, you could actually feel it. It's palpable, the sense of security in Japan. It lulls you into a false sense of security. There was a sense, if you leave a bag of money, forget your wallet, just leave a bag of money in a cab. The cab driver will search you out to the end of the earth and give it back to you. That's Japan. That's the way the culture is there. And there's this sense there that, nothing can happen to me. I'm okay now. But as I looked down, I was coming down, flying down, and I saw the ambulance, the lights going on. I thought, same thing. Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi, same in the heavenly planet. You may go to heaven, and it's same thing, there's something wrong. There's a deep-seated anxiety there. Only situation where one can actually feel completely satisfied, Astita Dir Muni, is when one's situated in this conviction that Krishna is protecting me. Only Krishna protects me. So the Pandavas are in that category. They're not taking shelter of any situation in the material world, but only of their shelter of Krishna. And of course, Queen Kunti expresses it when she says that, Vipara Shantita Sashvat Tatra Tatra Jagad Guru Bhavato Darshanam Yatsad Apunar Bhavadarshanam. And that is, let it happen again and again that there's calamity. Who prays for that? Only somebody who's really on that point, that I'm taking shelter of Krishna. Let the calamity come, because then let me squeeze out every last drop of this optimism for the material world, the devotee's thinking. I don't want that poison in my veins where I'm thinking like, oh, I'm okay. A copanolene, we call it. It's like you get a nice new car, you got a full tank of gas, you got something in the bank, everything looks good. And so then the weather's nice, you roll down the window and you lean out a little bit. And you're like driving with two fingers, it's like, I got power steering. And this is called copanolene. It's like, I'm good, I'm cool, everything's fine in the material world. And bang! The crocodile grabs your leg. And the phone call comes and everything's repossessed. This is the material world, and the devotee knows that, doesn't want that drop of this sense of material enjoyment in his or her veins. And the Pandavas are completely pure devotees. So they're not dependent on that external sense. In fact, the pure devotee is also aware of the fact that it can enter in at any time, and therefore is averse to it, any kind of material enjoyment. He even mentioned the Bhagavatamrita, the Yadus, when Narada visited them, they were trying to invent a calamity so Krishna would come back. And it's like, same as Queen Kunti, let them come again and again, these calamities, so that I can take shelter of you. We barely scratched the surface, there's so much more to do. But there's always, hopefully, other times we can do it. But that's it for today. We tried, at least, to have some discussion. We went to Jagannath Puri, and I must say that every time we go there, it becomes sweeter. And we went to Mayapur, and I must say, every time we go there, it becomes sweeter. And I also was feeling very fortunate to have touched all 3 dhams within an annual period, because we go to Vrindavan for Kartik, and then for this yatra, which is getting a life of its own. It's becoming an institution. We were able to go to Jagannath Puri, and it was just a constantly pleasant experience being there in the Dham and being able to go to the holy places and sit and hear about the various pastimes of the Lord. But what made it even better, and I have a formula I came back with, what made it even better was that we prepared ourselves before we went to the Dham to distribute Krishna consciousness, to distribute books, prasadam, and the holy names. So we went in with that idea, not that we're just going there to enjoy the Dham, to feel that bliss of being in various places, and definitely that bliss is there. But we also extended ourselves and we gave out tons of prasadam, about 5,000 lollipops, right? We had all together. And we had hundreds of books, and Shraddha and Mukharvind to work tirelessly on arranging that for no less than 1 year. And they've already started planning for next year. And this year, while we were in the Dham, we realized that we were giving out lollipops to the humans, but the dogs were looking at us like, what's with you? And so we got bread for the dogs, and we were given, and one of the points that I was especially touched by is Ananda Murari, in one of our reflection series, he said, you know, I went and I gave a piece of bread to a dog. It was all prasadam, we offered everything, cookies we got for them and bread. And it said the dog looked up at him twice and said, really? Are you kidding me? He said he had such gratitude in his eyes that, wow, you brought me a piece of bread. He was so appreciative. And then we thought, well, the cows are here. We got to get gur for the cows. So we had lollipops for all the people. We had gur for the cows and bread for the dogs. And in that spirit of giving, books and the holy name, which was so eloquently presented by the 3 brahmacharis that we brought, we couldn't have had a better combination, because every one of them was a musical expert, not just in harmonium, but also in singing and in playing the mridanga and kartals. And so the 3 of them were interchangeable, and it just made the whole atmosphere completely transcendental. So while I was, when we went to Mayapur, there's a way in which we, Hare Krishna. He's giving me the numbers of devotees who are online. 120. Hare Krishna. All grace to the assembled devotees. This is the last point, but it came as a formula, and I think I heard it in a class by Navina Nirada Prabhu. I went to, he gave several presentations at the so-called ILS, ISKCON Leadership Sangha. We had seminars and things. But he was recalling that during our yatra, how we were giving out prasadam, the holy names, and books. And he was saying how this is the perfect combination. And then I was thinking how it actually, by bringing these 3 ingredients together anywhere in the universe, one gets a kind of combustion. This is what can really take you to a higher level. If you organize yourself around this principle, get prasadam, books, and the holy name to distribute. Organize yourself around that principle. And you put those 3 things together, and it's like in a laboratory, when you put together the right chemicals and you get an explosion. Did you ever do that when you were a kid? I'm not going to go into it because I already got myself in trouble about blowing things up. But there are combinations of chemicals you can put together that make explosions. And that one, these 3 ingredients, if you put those together in any way in your life to distribute prasadam, the holy names, and books, and if you put them all together in one place, you can blow any little town or even a major city, you can blow it sky high. Just bring those 3 ingredients together and put it together, and there's this spiritual explosion that happens. And everyone becomes happy. All the devotees just immediately come to the Brahmabhuta platform and beyond. And all the people who come in contact with it, with that energy of the distribution of the holy names, prasadam, and books, which is written kirtan, then they also enter into that, and we saw it for ourselves. One of the images that stuck in my mind as we were passing out prasadam, going down one of the small lanes with our Harinam Kirtan in Jagannath Puri, the kids were passing out lollipops. And there was an old man, older gentleman, sitting on one of the stoops to one of those little shops, that are along the street, and he was working meticulously on fixing something, tinkering, so he was very focused. And the kid came and held a lollipop out for him. So first he saw the lollipop, and he thought, what's this? And then he looked up and he saw a kid handing him a lollipop. And it's usually like an older person that hands a lollipop to. Then he was kind of like surprised that how is a kid giving me a lollipop? And I was thinking that in the distribution of the Sankirtan movement, there are no restrictions. Anybody can distribute and anybody can receive, which also reminds me, and this really is my last point, about how when we were doing the Harinam Sankirtan in front of the Jagannath Mandir, which is really ecstatic, we set up a Harinam party, and we also had put up a table, and we brought along Dhameshwar Mahaprabhu with us, and we set him up also on a table. And then we had the distribution of books and prasadam and Jagannath stickers all around the Harinam Kirtan, and people were going nuts. They came in from everywhere, and they started dancing wildly and everything, and all this thing was going on. And in the midst of that, I was helping to distribute some of the books, and there was a beggar, a professional beggar who was going around collecting, and she had her bowl, and she also, I think she was missing a hand, and she had it wrapped up and everything like that. And so she came up to me, and she was begging from me. She wanted a book. And so, I gave her the book, and I said, but you got to give a donation. And so a lot of people were watching, because it's like, can you actually beg from a beggar? Is that allowed? Is it ethical? And see, the reason I was thinking about it was because I heard from Navina Nirada Prabhu in a talk he gave at Govardhan last year in one of our little Srimad Bhagavatam classes, and how he'd been up in Hrishikesh, and the kirtan and the distribution of prasadam and books had become so ecstatic that the local beggar there took out of his pocket all his money, and he started going around and giving it away to all the devotees. He was in so much ecstasy. And so I kept insisting, and people were watching. There was kind of like a circle around us, like, you're going to beg from a beggar? What's going to happen now? It was like a standoff. I would say, no, you have to give something. And my reasoning was that this is for a higher cause. It's you'll actually get benefit giving for the Sankirtan movement. So people were watching, and she had a very stern face and was saying no, and like showing I have a begging bowl and I'm a beggar and everything like that. And then suddenly she just broke out in a big smile. Like she understood that she had been holding out, and now she surrendered, and she got this really big smile on her face, and she pulled out some coins from her thing, and she gave the coins, and the people in the crowd were like, "Haribol!" So I took those coins to Shraddha, and I said, "Take very good care of these coins. These came from a beggar in Jagannath Puri, and make sure it goes in a good place." So she asked, where should I put them? It was already in Mayapur. So I asked her to put them in Lord Nrsingadev's hundi, and I figured that would do a little damage somehow, one way or the other. But the point is that the damage that is done to the material world by the Sankirtan movement is palpable, it's calculable. And this is the daring and active service that one can engage in. That plus intensified sadhana will bring one to the next level, so one can go back home, back to Godhead, and that's the real water that one can drink in this age of Kali Yuga. Go Premanande Haribo! Vancha kalpadurvascha kripasnabhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Go Premanande. Now when's the break fast? It ends at 10:20, so you have, Nirkula has grains for you from Jagannath Puri, the little grains of rice from the Mahaprasad from Lord Jagannath, so you can each take a grain, because this way we can have our Guru Puja and not miss the breaking of the fast. And then right after that, we'll have prasadam. Unless this is enough for you for the day. Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey! Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.